Laura Sonnek is a Bethany graduate, and the show that we have in the gallery is titled Chromophobia. We're going to talk about that. We're going to hear about that. Our format today, who's that guy? Our format today is something we've never done before, and I hope you'll forgive it a little bit. It feels a little self-aggrandizing to me, but the idea is that I'll interview Laura in front of all of you. I'll ask her questions. She'll draw me while I'm interviewing her. We've already begun this. We had a session where she could kind of do the hard brain work of finding proportions and trying to really concentrate to get some things down. So she'll be sort of multitasking. And we talked the other day about how for some people communication is an information superhighway, and for some people it's a dirt road. I'm the dirt road, and she's very capable of managing all of these things at the same time. So let's go. You've got a mic. You want to check your mic?
Sure.
Oh, there it is.
Ooh. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know there's 1,000 other things you could be doing on a Thursday night, and I'm very, very glad that you're here with celebrating the show this evening. So as Professor Jasperson has mentioned, this is a new thing for me too. So I'll kind of be standing over here and kind of darting glances in your direction as well. So the information superhighway is a very generous comment. I also have a dirt road, but I'm very excited to be here. So we'll kind of get into it with Professor Jasperson's questions. So
Okay,
kind
here
of
we
get
go.
started.
Let's talk about the title of the show. Let's lead off with chromophobia. Is that a made-up word?
No, it is not. It's actually stolen. There is it's an actual medical thing. It's a fear of exposure to.
Help me pose. Right? Am I doing all right?
Yeah, I just got excited about your collared shirt. And I
I need
think,
to stare at the pole.
actually, I could see more of your eye. Hold on.
Stand by.
This is art in progress. This is really wonderful. It's like watching a baby penguin being born.
I don't understand.
It is the artist in the natural habitat. So this is really, really fun for me because public speaking is, I think, something that very few people truly enjoy. And while I'm very honored to be here, drawing is one of the things that I find incredibly relaxing. So hopefully between those two, we'll find a very good rhythm. So chromophobia, yes. So it is a fear of exposure and also contamination to bright colors. I do not suffer from that at all. I was not in any kind of pain while I was making the works that you see this evening. But I first learned about it when I started reading during my grad school experience this book called Chromophobia by a really, really interesting Scottish artist named David Batchelor. And he was talking about its roots, particularly in Western society, about how, generally speaking, we tend to collectively as a society shy away from really chromatic colors. Not all colors in a general sense, just really specifically chromatic ones. They're often associated with, let's say, I think Target is a really great example of this. If you walk through the kids section, whether it's toys or apparel or anything like that, and then you walk through any of the apparel for, adults, there's a really distinct color shift that happens. And now you can call that taste or sophistication or whatever you want to, but bright colors are often associated with the infantile or the exotic or what's the word I'm looking for? Exotic, infantile, or just kind of bizarre, I think, is probably the word I'm searching for. So
I'd be making polite eye contact, but it would put you backwards. You're busy.
Thank you, yeah. So that was a phenomenon that I hadn't really paid much attention to until I started reading the book. And then I started seeing it everywhere. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And as someone who loves really, really bright color, I think it's so interesting that as a society, we've collectively decided that really, really bright colors are something that we should kind of assign to these categories, which I don't think is fair. And so in my own work, I am really, really seeking to push through that natural discomfort for the audience and explore and celebrate color for its own sake.
Okay. So the last note that you just said, I think is something I want to talk about, the discomfort, pushing through the discomfort. Is it important for you that there is a discomfort in these paintings?
Like in the mind of the viewer?
Yes, in the observer.
There's a couple different ways to answer that, I think, and it's a really, really great question.
Thank you.
What is most important to me, I guess, as the artist, I would say is the interest of the viewer. And not the interest of the viewer in the sense of, they like it, but they at least they stop and look at it. That's really and truly my intent as the artist. I was talking with Ben a little bit about this, the wonderful Ben Lunston, and we were talking about the purpose of the show and any of reactions that I would like to be elicited from the audience. And ultimately, I just don't want anyone to look at these and be bored. With specific colors, there's so much that's already packed into them in terms of personal experiences and memories and things like that. Some people love green, some people hate green, and no one can really understand why. And so that part I have no control over. But I do want to create an interesting subject, and hopefully a delightful one, although that is a little bit of a harder, that's more of a mysterious and difficult reaction to capture.
So I asked a question that led you in the opposite direction of what you would want. You said delight, and I asked about repulsion, really.
Yeah, you did.
Why did I ask? Maybe I asked because somebody looked at one of these paintings and said, "This looks like a concussion."
Yes, I know that student too. She's wonderful.
Yeah, she's usually pretty great.
Yeah, she's fantastic. So she was talking specifically about that pairing right there. I think, unless it was collectively, globally, the show. And so with that piece and specifically, I kind of answered your question on the global. I guess in the global sense, but with that piece in particular, very happy that she had that reaction. So that particular diptych that's over there is myself and my husband. He's wearing a spaghetti strainer, and I look kind of horrified. And there's the reason why that piece was created is I had just started doing some concept sketches of a diptych of the two of us together when we found out that we were expecting our daughter Ivy. And this was very joyful news for both of us, although if you looked at that pairing, you wouldn't think so. We were so excited to be starting a family, and had there was a lot that's packed into that news, though, even if it's something that you're hoping for. I immediately had this feeling of panic, and this feeling of just being completely overwhelmed because you really go from caring about yourself and your relationship to immediately looking after a very small and very vulnerable little human. And that shift really, really did happen overnight. And again, even when it's something that you're preparing for and really, really excited about, it's completely overwhelming at the same time. And so I was panicking really hard because, I like to control things and I like to know what's going to happen. And there's so many things about pregnancy that you have absolutely no control over a lot of it. And it's a very isolating feeling, and you have to put a lot of trust in really God and, trying to just have as responsible, of an attitude about it as you can. So I was freaking out. And my husband, Mark, is very wonderful, and in many ways, just so completely wonderful and wise. Had a very lighthearted and like grounding presence at that time. And he was talking about all the things that we were enjoy doing together as a family. So he took a very lighthearted approach. And so in that diptych that you see, you kind of have his like super lighthearted approach in there. But what I really, really wanted to do as the artist, especially since it was my experience, you know, becoming a mother, is kind of show this kind of like sense of being like sick. I had a really tough time, especially through the first trimester, with a lot of stuff. I was working 3 jobs at the time. We were living in California. Everything was on fire, literally and figuratively. And I just felt sick. And it's such an odd reaction to have over something that's so joyful. So that piece attempts to crystallize those whole like first 3 months for me, basically. So the reverberation of the color and the fact that it looks kind of funky and like a little bit heady, I hope is conveyed to the audience, because that was exactly what I was going through at that time. I don't know why I chose spaghetti strainer. I will probably know in like between 4 to 5 years why I asked my husband to pose with a strainer.
So you're saying a few things there. I really like the idea that that the artwork you said crystallizes. That you told this whole backstory, and this is like a zip file. This thing contains all of that for you. You pack all of that into this object. Is it important for you that we know the story? Is it necessary that we know everything you just said?
Well, I hope it helps with, again, that feeling of concussion. Unfortunately, as much as I would like to, I can't stand next to that piece and explain the zip file as much as I would like to.
Because you're busy?
Yeah. Although, for the right dollar amount, I totally will. You just say the word. I don't know if that's in the art budget or not. I think that the most important thing for me about these pieces is capturing, again, a moment in time or a relationship or something that I was going through, and hopefully trying to give all of that to the viewer and let them kind of process that in whatever way is most helpful for them. Hopefully you can relate to it, or you can be like, not for me, no thank you. But hopefully you at least stopped and looked and it made you think something.
You want engagement.
I would love engagement.
You don't necessarily need people to understand it or even like it, but you want people to consider it.
That is beautifully said, yes.
Thank you. Let's go back to something you said earlier. You were talking about the panic, partially because you felt, let's say, underqualified, unprepared.
Oh, totally. I still am.
So this is a brilliant segue coming. Just warning you. Tell us about Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, should we ask one of my students from Drawing 1 if they remember what the Dunning-Kruger effect is?
Anybody remember, or Drawing 1 students?
That's a really neat thing.
I'd have to run this microphone or chuck this microphone so the camera picks it up.
Don't everybody volunteer at once. No, that's a really mean thing to do, and I want to actually insist that we do that. The Dunning-Kruger effect is something that Andy actually talks a little bit about in his, I think, is it graphic design 1? Yes. Yay! American Idol. You get this wonderful hopeful from Ohio who is convinced that they are Mariah Carey, and they cannot sing, but they are so passionate and so convinced that they'll argue with the judge about how they could really sing. And it sounds like a cat being run over by a lawnmower. And it's like almost heartbreaking in a certain sense, because they're so convinced of something that has no basis in reality. So that's kind of the start of the Dunning-Kruger effect. When I started going to, and I'll explain a little bit more what that means.
I just want to make sure everybody's clear. So what we're saying is that somebody's not good at a thing, but they think they are?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes, thank you. I got really excited about the
Dunning-Kruger effect.
The Dunning-Kruger effect, yes,
Okay.
correct. No, totally. I got really excited about the lawnmower example, and I kind of like jumped a couple steps, so thank you. Yeah, so the Dunning-Kruger effect does tie into that example. When I first started going to graduate school, I had a really, really tough time, and I wanted to drop out so badly. What kind of happened to me, I think, is like the textbook example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I left Bethany with a really strong understanding, I think, in the visual arts, and I loved my teachers, and Bill Bukowski is a great, inspiring figure, and he's sitting right behind me. And I'm not just saying that because he's here. He really is fantastic. He's been my art teacher since I was like 9, and he's just wonderful. And he, I think set our whole graduating class up with a really good understanding of the arts. What I didn't realize, though, was that the information that I received, which was really expansive, is not the same as 25 years in your discipline. As wonderful as your Bethany teachers are, they cannot condense 25 years of individual struggle into 4 years in college. They do set you up with the knowledge, but they cannot pack the rest of that into there. So I kind of showed up to grad school thinking that I already had it figured out, and I was basically there just to collect a degree and paint and go to the beach. I went to school in California. And I was very, very shocked when I realized that everyone else in my grade knew stuff that I didn't know, and it was super humbling. And I like to be the best at everything that I do. That's something that I struggle with every day. And it was just, I kind of had a moment where I was like, oh no, I have made a grave error. I should have taken more notes. And then I did in grad school every day. I would go home and Google stuff that I'd learned in class. And the whole point of grad school is to learn, but I came in with the attitude that I didn't need to. And so it was very much like the singer from Ohio who's coming in and thinking, that really they're the next best thing. And I just realized how much I had yet to learn. And the chair of the department, Peter Zukoski, is a wonderful, incredible, just the best. He's like Santa for adults. He was so encouraging, and he told me about the Dunning-Kruger effect. And basically what that is, I want to turn around for a second, although I'm having a lot of fun with this beard. So it's kind of a phenomenon that occurs when you have a tiny, tiny bit of experience, and your confidence level is really disproportionate to what you actually know. But you're really excited about that information that you have. It's just like, oh, this is great. I know what I need to know. You will see this across all disciplines as well. This doesn't just happen in the arts. So if you've got that weird coworker that's like knows a lot but doesn't know a lot, and you're like, that's weird. Who do they talk to? That's kind of part of the Dunning-Kruger effect. So your confidence is super high. What you know is like maybe 2% of what you actually need to know, right? And then what happens is, as you continue on with your education or your experience in that field, if you actually take it in and absorb it, then you realize how much you don't know, and it's a very steep drop. So that peak of confidence is called, it depends on what articles you're reading, but the one that I remember is the peak of Mount Stupid. And then once you realize that once you know how much you don't know, you're like, oh no. And then it's like a very, very steep and quick drop down into what's called the pit of despair. And this is where students typically drop out of majors or switch majors. This is when you switch jobs. This is when you decide to, move on to underwater basket weaving and so on and so forth. And then even though you know more at this point than you've ever known about your discipline and you're actively studying it, it still feels like you're treading water, or you're going backwards, or you're drowning. One of the two is typically where that, and the only way to get through that is by continuing your study. It's the only way, and by taking in as much information as possible. And so I kind of gone down into this pit, so to speak, and Peter was so encouraging, and my classmates were so encouraging, and he was explaining that this is a super normal thing that everybody goes through, and it's a really good check for your ego too. And part of the process of being an artist is being a lifelong learner, which I know everybody says, but very few people, I think, actually believe that. And that is kind of the distilled Dunning-Kruger effect. And then as you continue on again with your education, that's the only way to kind of come out of that weird hole, we shall say. So,
Okay, so do you think it's helpful to know that it's coming?
yeah, I think so. I
The
absolutely
pit of
do.
despair
The pit of despair.
after Mount Stupid.
Exactly, I do. I think it's really important. I think if I had gone into my own personal experience with that knowledge ahead of time, I would have made, I think it would have helped me not freak out as much. And
Okay.
so I try to talk about it in every class that I teach, regardless of whether or not it fits.
Forgive what I'm about to say.
Oh.
It's a very professorial thing to say. I think reality is fractal.
That's so offensive.
No, it's not. That's not offensive. It's just like maybe cliche. Like, so think. Here's what I mean. Like you're describing a progression where you're excited, and then, like, oh, it's too difficult. I can't do it.
Yep,
And then you have to climb out of that.
yep.
Doesn't that happen with every artwork? Doesn't it happen on a smaller scale, like you described in like a career scale? Do you experience that per painting?
I do, but I know to expect it now, which I didn't before. Before, if I had a bad painting, it was because it was the reference image's fault. Or, really, usually I just blame the reference image. I was like, ooh, that was bad resolution.
So you didn't take credit before for the badness?
I didn't take credit for any of the, the ick, I think. And it's really hard looking back because my memory gets worse by the day. But I don't think, especially in undergrad, it felt like a very lucky thing, if a painting succeeded or if it failed. Or again, I had the good reference images, or I was inspired. That was another big one. And something that Professor Bukowski would say a lot is that inspiration is for amateurs. And I think that is absolutely accurate. And so even though I was crediting inspiration, I don't really think it had anything to do with that necessarily. So
Okay,
answers
let's
your
talk about
questions.
these objects, right? Enough theory. Let's talk about the real things, the objects. Is scale an important consideration? The size of the object, the painting.
For some of these, yes. And for some of them, I just painted them at that size because I didn't have a lot of room.
Right,
Yeah.
There's a studio. There's always a studio that you have to fit a painting in. You have to
Yep.
operate.
Totally.
I'm trying to get at, like, let's talk about the paintings. The tactile quality or the presence of the painting. That's what I want to get at, the
Okay.
presence of the painting. Because I've seen your work on Instagram, as, that's what artists do. You put out your work on some sort of a platform. And this is not the same experience in several ways.
Oh, thank you. I really hope not. No, I really do hope that they have more of a presence in person. That doesn't always happen. I used to work in a gallery, and sometimes you would see an image on a JPEG, and you'd be like, "That's amazing, that's so cool," and then you see it in person, and it's almost forgettable. So it doesn't always go that direction. So
I guess I didn't say they were good.
that's true.
I just
I
said
just assumed.
it's different. Yeah. No, I think they are.
Oh,
so let me be
no.
clear. I want to be clear. I think they're exquisite. They're really beautifully painted.
Oh, thank you.
And I do think that being life-size or larger is significant when we're used to seeing images on a tiny device, a tiny little pixely approximation, and then you encounter the real thing, and you realize, what I realize is there's craftsmanship. And you can really detect it when you get close. I encourage you all to, sniff the painting.
Please do. Please do.
Get close.
That would be awesome. Just don't touch the noodles on that one.
The noodles are wet, I
The
hear.
noodles are wet. Please don't touch the noodles.
We talked a little bit when you started this drawing about craftsmanship, is that a line you want to pick up?
Sure. Yeah, really excited
Great.
about this shading. In terms of craftsmanship, for me, the more I've studied painting and the more like great and horrific paintings that I've done, the more I realize the importance of good prep, which was, again, a really important lesson for me to learn. Again, painting is hard enough on its own, and it's time consuming, and it's expensive. And no one's going to make me do it. So in order to set myself up for the most success, it starts before I even pick up a brush. I take all my own reference photos now, which I didn't used to. I do lots of concept sketches. I do lots of color studies, especially with big paintings like this where you're using a lot of paint. I want to be very sure that I know what the value range is going to look like, what cadmiums I need to invest in, and that really the only way I'll know for sure if something is going in the right direction and the values are making sense is with color studies.
For the uninitiated, explain cadmiums.
Cadmium, pure pigmented color. Typically they're a little bit more expensive.
And poisonous.
And poisonous, yes, they are.
Heavy metal.
Heavy, very. You can get cancer from them. So that also adds an element of danger. So with all that, and then before the paintings even get started, I don't stretch any of my own canvases because I have a real fear of saws. But they all do get primed with a really thick kind of, it's called Gamblin oil ground. And my mentor, Alla, introduced me to it. And for that, and for many other reasons, if she ever needs a kidney, she knows she can call me first. But Gamblin oil ground is fantastic because what it does, it's a really, really thick primer that you can tone with any color that you want. I usually tone it with gray since it matches my palette, which is gray. And it's so much easier to tell what color you're mixing if you're mixing it on a palette that's the same color as your surface. And that's something I learned from Peter. Shout out Peter. I had a point with that. Where's it going?
Craftsmanship.
Craftsmanship, yeah. So I pre-mix all my colors. I let this really, really thick primer dry. And what's so awesome about the Gamblin oil ground, this is not a sponsored segment from them, although if they wanted to sponsor me, I would be thrilled, is that it, sometimes your canvas will eat your paint. If you guys have taken, yeah, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. It'll soak in, even on a primed canvas. And so the color that you put in, which was initially like really bright, it'll dry, and then your canvas it will meld. It will like suck some of the color out of it. It's really weird, really cool. But it's also really annoying if you're kind of like want to be a one-pass wonder. So the Gamblin oil ground really helps that color stay on the surface and not get eaten, for lack of a better term, or absorbed, maybe absorbed is a better term, by your canvas. So craftsmanship for me is really important because it helps set up a better probability of success than I know I would have without it.
So you carefully set up circumstances before you begin.
Yes.
Do you have a clean studio?
We should ask my husband if I have a clean studio. He said that my side was clean, which is very generous. I think so. I have my paint organized. I think clean is a spectrum. I think I'm somewhere in the middle.
Sure. Clean as a spectrum. That sounds like a t-shirt. You have a shared studio.
I do, yeah.
Shared
It's my
studio.
basement. It's our basement, yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's wonderful to be able to paint with another artist. It's one of the most wonderful advantages. And my husband Mark has 2 MFAs, so he's got extra brains. And the wonderful, wonderful thing about that is that anytime I get stuck, I don't have to go very far to get a second pair of eyes. When you're working on a piece and you're spending a lot of time with it, you eventually become immune to like the good things about it and also the flaws. For this one, for example, the one of the two of us, I had started the underdrawing, and I thought he looked great, and I thought I looked really weird, like Sid the Sloth from Ice Age, and I could not figure out what it was, and I had done like some measurements, and I was like, wow, this is really weird. Maybe my face has changed. And then I was like, Mark, what's going on? And he's like, oh, your eyes are like up in the middle of your forehead. I was like, oh man, you're so right. So like that's totally invaluable for me and for my practice. It's one of the great and wonderful things about being married to another artist. The only disadvantage is sometimes we kind of fight over whose paint is whose, but that really is a very small price to pay. When you leave college or grad school, you lose that community. Sometimes you can lose that immediate community of artists that can always tell you what's going on and what you need to fix. And that's like an amazing benefit you guys have right now, is you're surrounded by artists and teachers that are immediately there for you to help you out, which is so different from going home, spending hours with something, staring at it and being like, I don't know. And then who are you gonna call, you know? Thank you. So no one's really asked me for any advice in that department, but that is something that I really, really treasured in my time here at Bethany. The advice from my teachers and my classmates, who are all like, especially in my major, was just so spectacular. And yeah, use them as much as you can for a secondary opinion. It doesn't make you look stupid, it just makes you look smarter. Does that answer your question?
You're doing great.
Thank you.
Should we think of these as portraits?
As opposed to?
To me, a portrait has a certain, I don't know, expectation or baggage, and I ask because I feel like not. I feel like their purpose for being is something beyond a likeness.
Yeah, I think if I was going purely for likeness, I would stay in a really realistic color palette. One that, you know, was the same as the subject's skin tone, where their hair color was the same as their actual hair color, etc. For me, I think the portrait, in and of itself, is a vehicle that I use to process life experiences and things of that nature. So yes and no.
Yeah, I think I believe them. I feel convinced that they are a good likeness, and then I feel like they take us further than that. They're more than simply a report. I think they're about some sort of interior something, right?
Yeah,
They're about
absolutely.
what's invisible, what's on the inside in some way.
Yeah, in a lot of ways there's stories. There's stories connected with all of them. Like, especially at like really pivotal moments in my life, it's a lot easier for me to paint. And that's normally when I do what I would consider to be my most successful work. So my favorite piece in the show is this one right behind me here. It's of my very good friend Mina. We worked at a martini bar together in Dana Point, California. And it sounds glamorous, and it was not at all. And we were kind of in a funky situation together with one of our managers who was I think a pervert would probably be the best way to put it. I can't think
Hello, YouTube.
I don't think there's really a better way to say it than that. And Mina was younger than me, and she was very outspoken that the behavior was wrong, and she was right. But I was kind of coming from a standpoint of going along to get along, and then it just kind of got to a point where it was just totally unmanageable. And so Mina was really wonderful and very bold, and she kind of helped bring everything to a good conclusion. And again, she was younger than me, not that that means a lot, but she was very bold and very brave. And so in this piece right here, she's kind of has what I would consider a traditionally masculine pose, where her shoulders are kind of pushed forward. She's occupying a lot of space, which as women we're kind of told not to do necessarily. We're told to be a lot smaller and a lot more palatable. And she's in the middle of a transition. There's a before and the after. And the before is kind of pushed back, and the after the unseen. We normally don't see the bubble pop in pop culture. We've all seen Michelangelo with a gum bubble, Marilyn Monroe with a gum bubble. It's used very commonly in pop culture, but we normally don't see the after effects. So this painting is a lot about the after. And the thing that I really, really respected about Mina is, again, she's got this really strong stance, but there's also a very strong element of vulnerability. Does anyone know what that necklace is?
The necklace?
Yeah, does anyone recognize that symbol? It is trademarked, so I hope they don't sue me. It's kind of like a life alert, essentially, but for vulnerable, not vulnerable adults, but adults who are in like tricky situations. So basically, if you press that thing, it'll send your GPS coordinates to the closest police station. So there's a really interesting, for me anyway, a really interesting juxtaposition between her very strong stance and then this really strong era of vulnerability as well. So that's kind of my tribute to her. So it is her and it isn't her at the same time.
And I love what you just told us about it matches with the title so well. The title is HR Violation.
Yeah. So her mom worked in HR, and she just was like, I know this is an HR violation. I just know it. And she was right. It definitely was. So I have a lot of respect for her. She's a very strong warrior.
So that's what I'm talking about. I believe, I love that painting too. I believe that it's an accurate likeness of the human, like the exterior of the human, but what you say about the stance, what you decide to do in the passage of time, and the way that you're choosing to maybe embed that necklace just gives us more. It's more than just a portrait.
It is for me, for sure, so I hope it is for the viewer as well.
Are these intended to go with the couch?
No, not at all. I would be really offended if someone thought I was painting for their home decor, to match their home decor, I should say.
Then what?
Well, I think,
Is there anything else?
is there anything else? I am hopeful that the viewer, either through color or through expression, is able to somehow connect it to their own life. That would be the best case scenario. I understand that's not going to happen for everybody, but they are intended to be kind of a service for the viewer, both to help them connect with their own past or their own memories, or if they find the expressions funny or humorous, that's a huge bonus for me as the artist. But ultimately, these pieces are created kind of as a processing point for me. I'm at a really I'm very lucky to be able to paint just for myself right now. I don't have to satisfy a gallery. I don't have to satisfy, degree requirements or anything like that. I can just paint what I want to without necessarily fulfilling any other expectations, which is a huge gift, and it's really kind of great just to be able to create for the sake of creating.
Okay, so to distill that, you're saying it's a gift that you give, that you offer, and also a gift that you get, and it's not necessarily about marketability.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that they're very marketable at all, to be totally forthright. I mean, unless you really love color, then maybe color and weird expressions, but no, they're not intended to satisfy the consumer appetite, which is really interesting. The thing that I really find really fascinating about the art market is that, I mean, especially in society right now, we're so consumer focused, or consumption focused, excuse me. We're so heavily consumption focused, which has some benefits and a lot of drawbacks in the way that I see it. And so it's really interesting as a studio artist, and some of you guys might experience this with your own work, But people assume that everything you paint is for them specifically, and it's meant to appeal to their own taste, which is great if that happens. But what the flip side of that is that sometimes people get really offended if they don't like your taste, and they feel like it's their duty to inform you that they don't like what you made. Instead of, I would argue, just considering the fact that maybe it's not for them and moving on. People kind of assume, again, we're so focused on consuming and eating all the time in our culture, that anything that you make is, for them to consume. And sometimes people get a little bit offended if you make something that they don't like. So that's something, it's kind of an interesting phenomenon.
Is it safe to say that a proper approach as a viewer would be curiosity?
Yes.
We should just kind of wonder about it?
I think so, yeah. I think that would be the best case scenario outcome for me personally. Is if it sparked curiosity.
How's the drawing going?
I feel pretty good about your glasses.
Yeah?
I'm still working on your ear.
Okay, I'll go back. How's the format feel?
Really fun.
Okay.
This is an excellent audience. 5 stars.
You're the best audience on the whole tour?
Yes.
We love you, Mankato.
I wish I had a t-shirt cannon, but I was not
Upper
prepared.
deck.
Yeah, exactly. How are we doing for time? Should I go faster on your ear?
No.
Okay.
No, you should just focus. You're doing great. How about aspirations? Can we crystal ball a little bit and
Aspirations
think about,
as an artist or as a person?
Let's take all of it.
Ooh.
What do you hope for?
Ooh. I want to do what I was put on earth to do. And I think I know what that is. I know it's creating in some fashion, and I just hope that I do it to the full extent that I'm able to. I'd say on the global scale, I want to know and serve God in this life and be happy with Him forever in the next. I want to be a very, very good wife and a very good mother. I think my successes, if I have any as an artist, won't mean a lot if I just royally bomb in those 2 categories. So I would say that's probably, and I want to be a really good friend. I want to be a really, really, really good friend. So let's say that's kind of where I hope to be. I was watching an interview with some Bethany students that graduated last spring, and they were talking about their favorite teachers. And the art department came up a lot, which is always kind of wonderful. And there was one young man who said something about you, which has really stuck with me ever since. And I'm not just saying that because I'm drawing your ear. But he was talking about how in your class, and I don't think he was in our major, I don't know which student this is. Feel free to shout out the name if you know who he is. But he was saying that you taught him that it's important to be a human being and not just a human doing. And I think about that a lot. And I think that ties into your original question quite a bit. Which is, it's important to be able to sustain yourself and your family in terms of your work ethic and stuff. But being a human being is a really, really tough thing to be.
That was an excellent answer.
Thank you. Thank you for wearing the same glasses as the original
Okay.
outline that we did. No, I was just thinking about how big of a bummer that would be if you, with the original drawing. Anyway, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Please
Hey, Ben
continue.
Lunston. Still here? Now I understand why you offered to run the microphone.
See, I was just a little bit ahead.
Yeah, I hadn't thought that through. If we have audience questions, you need to speak into the microphone for the camera, but I can't leave the chair.
We can just switch. People say we look alike.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Lunston. Any audience questions? Anything you want to know from Laura?
How do you pick the color combinations that you use? Besides the, trying to do something bold and how do you pick the color combinations that you use?
I think for some of them it depends on the emotion. So for that one, I was going for like kind of something that would be, because those both are complementary colors, so they should go together, but somehow they don't at the same time. So I was trying to find something that again would have a warm and a cool tone, but would also be really uncomfortable to look at. So I cycled through a couple different options. There was, I think, like a yellow and bluish one that was interesting, but in terms of just like picking some of these other ones, it kind of comes down to, and this feels like a cop-out answer, but intuition. If I'm looking at like 5 or 6 or 7 of them in a row, there's usually like 2 that I'm like, oh, those are good. But I couldn't really tell you why. I think it just kind of comes down to personal taste. So thank you so much for the question.
You just mentioned that when you're choosing your colors, you want it to be something that's comfortable to look at, but the chromophobia definition said that it's supposed to create a feeling of discomfort. How does that kind of tie together?
Totally, yeah, thank you, Rachel. So I think with the overall definition of chromophobia, it's any bright color, regardless of what it's kind of paired next to, that's uncomfortable. So I like to think that some of these are harmonious, but despite what I personally think as the artist, there's some people that'll look at these and be like, whoa, no thank you. And that's where kind of chromophobia, to me, that's where the title comes from. So.
You said that it might take you 4 or 5 years to determine why you put a spaghetti strainer in your piece. Was there anything particular that inspired you to pick certain models or certain things that you wanted to feature in your show?
Oh, thank you, Jackson. Yeah, so I try, for the most part, I paint people that I know, just because it's easier to elicit certain reactions out of people that you already have a rapport with. There's some super, super talented art models out there, but it's a lot easier to be like, all right, you should make that one face that you make, after you ate that weird thing, when we were out to eat. So a lot of that really comes down to who I kind of have available and who's willing to pose. And then from there, I'm able to do kind of color studies to kind of figure out a little bit more where I'm going with that. Did that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
In regards to like the entire show, looking back on it, now do you have like a singular like creed almost that this gallery has like solidified for you? That's the worst way to ask this question.
No,
oh my gosh.
not at all.
It's a combination of what is this about and what have you learned?
It's a really good question, Lydia. I am very much still learning, which again is a cop-out answer. The more I paint and the more I practice in my discipline, the more I realize I don't know anything. So maybe that would be probably the most honest way to answer that, which is not particularly helpful. But it would probably be a combination of, I don't know anything, but I'm having a great time. So if I had to distill the show into one phrase, no problem. Thank you. That's a good question.
Hi.
Hi.
From start to finish, how long does it normally take you to complete one of these paintings?
Ooh, okay, so Bukowski told me many years ago, if anyone asked me how long it took to finish a painting, I had to give them my age. So I would say 26. 26 years for every single one of these paintings. But on a practical, I would say formal level, which is what you're asking, so in such a lovely way, is depending on the size, from, ooh,
When do you start?
That's super tough, because even when you're not painting, you're thinking about painting. So it's really tough to know how much time that is, at least in terms of mental work. I would say just from the physical activity of painting, probably anywhere between, I think the quickest one in here was 20 hours and the longest one was about 40. So that would be just physical painting time. But in terms of, prepping and color studies and thinking about painting, when I'm supposed to be doing other things, that's kind of like an around-the-clock deal. Photographers have that as well. I see them. Yeah. Sculptors have that as well. It's kind of a lifestyle. Yeah.
This might be kind of a weird question, so I'm sorry about that if it is. Did you have to have like a translation process between the emotions that you were feeling and the chromatic painting that you created? And if there was, like, what was that translation process like between emotion and creation?
Oh, totally. Thank you. That's a great question. It's super cathartic. It's really, really, really cathartic. It's a really wonderful experience. Sometimes I'll come into a piece and it's kind of either about a story or an experience, or I'm just having kind of a weird day. And the process of painting itself is it's such a wonderful release. And yeah. I think that's my daughter. So it's the most wonderful thing. But it really can only happen, I think, that kind of release if you kind of suspend any expectations of what you're doing, which is really tough to do. So.
Do you have any advice for students going into any of the arts?
Ooh. Oh, I should have prepared for that question. Okay, I'll give, yes, I do. College is the best place for you to fail. It's the safest place for you to fail. It's the best place to take risks. So I would, if I were gonna redo my college experience or my grad school experience, knowing what I know now, I would have really, really tried to stretch myself and not worried so much about making things that were pretty or aesthetic. And, tried more and experimented more, simply because you learn so much more from one bad painting than you do from 5, ones that you feel like are successful. And I think that translates to the rest of the art department as well, although I don't have a media arts background. So that's kind of what I would say. So yeah. Pete!
Laura, you're a funny person. And I think that I will never forget you walking into class or being on the theater physics stage and just being, when you'd walk on, the whole audience changed. You're funny now, like when you're talking with Jason, and the funny thing is you're one of these funny people who, when you're talking, the jokes go by so fast that you almost feel like you want to shut up and not laugh because you want to catch the next joke.
Aww, thank you. That's an amazing.
But now, I do have a point actually.
Okay. Shoot.
When we watch movies, sometimes comedians are some of the best serious actors. Robin Williams is great when he's funny, but when he's serious, maybe he's even better. There's Kristen Wiig, Jim Carrey, when I look at these paintings, I see, well, first of all, I see something that's so distinctly, of course it has to be, this has to be you, this work. And I recognize that a lot of these are very profound, and sometimes they don't, but under, even the ones that seem perhaps even green or dark, they seem like there's a thread of humor in them. And am I just dreaming that? Or is that, I look at these and I see, even over here where this was the one that's the sixth, when you say you're sick, maybe it's in the context with a husband with a colander on his head, but there's you decided to pair it with something funny. And I feel like this is something that as we listen to you talk and as you're drawing Jason while you're talking and you're sort of, these little quips are coming out of your mouth as you're going, there's something uniquely, there's this, we all know, we've all known it, there's something unique about you and humor is a part of it. And I feel like humor is a part of this show today too. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that or if it's something that's unconscious.
That's such a wonderfully, wonderfully kind comment. And when Pete is saying that he finds that they're funny, that's like the best case scenario for me. I think humor is one of the best ways of processing really anything. Humor is really only found in seeing both sides of the argument, right? So for me, if I'm going to be painting about something that's either difficult or I need to decompress, it's something like expressions particularly, and like the ramen painting in the back there. It's something where as I'm working on it, it's like a lighter touch point. So, and that combined with the colors, which are like very bright and very chromatic, is something that helps me kind of return to a piece that might be difficult. So I'm very glad you see them that way. That is such a huge compliment for me. So thank you.
Hello. I'm just curious, as one of your past students, what is it like for you as an experienced artist, but like you said, you're still learning. What is it like for you to then teach less experienced students? Or like going from being so experienced then to going back to just teaching the basics? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, the basics are so important. You really can't do anything in the visual arts if you don't have a good understanding of value, line quality, and design. It's just a really all-encompassing thing. So I and I'm a very young teacher as well, so I have not had the luxury of growing tired of the basics yet. And I would argue that all of your teachers probably are still finding stuff out of the basics that help inform their own practice. So it's really not a chore for me. It's just a really, really good refresher, and it helps my practice every day. The thing that's so awesome about teaching specifically is you guys are really good. Just if we look at like the global scale, there's always a couple that you're like, oh no, but there's something so spectacular about Bethany students. I was talking with Andy about that before the show started. It's a really incredibly talented group, and so I have had the pleasure of teaching at multiple institutions, where that last comment came from. But there's something about the enthusiasm of Bethany students that like revitalizes your own practice, and even the artistic practice in and of itself. Some of the best work I think can really come out of when you're like a student and you're just starting out. There's this really like wonderful enthusiasm that you like can't bottle. It's really hard to replicate once you've been working in your practice for a while and you've had lots of ups and lots of downs, more downs than ups. So it's a real honor to teach, is I think the long way around that question. You get so much from your students. It's very much almost like an equal exchange.
Hi.
Last one?
Yeah. So
Yes.
I'm wondering about the fact that you said that this is about color speaking for itself. And in some of your paintings, there's a much stronger contrast between two different colors, and in others, it's more the focus on one color.
Yeah.
So does color always speak for itself when it's compared to other colors, or sometimes is it just the actual color itself?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, yes, yeah. It's a really, really good question because it really depends on the piece. The thing that I find most engaging about color is that it changes so quickly depending on what it's next to. It's one of the most changeable things I would argue within the whole like design portfolio. It really, really depends on what is within the environment. So I would say that in my earlier work, I focused earlier, like 3 years ago. My earlier work, I was really, really interested in the play between like pink and green or red and green. I really, really, really like personally that color combination. And then over, I would say the last couple of years, I started moving into more of a monochromatic color palette. And I don't know why. Similar thing I'll probably know in like 4 to 5 years. But sometimes when you're in the middle of creating a body of work or a project, you know some stuff, but you don't necessarily have the whole picture yet. So I hope that answers your question. It was a really good one.
This has been delightful. Big round of applause, please, for that. Many thanks to Jason for the opportunity to be here. This would not have happened without his invitation and without his superior modeling skills. Thank you very, very much.